Hello, my name is Mauricio Siniceros. Thank you just for taking the time to let me interview you. So as a reminder, I will be taping you during this interview, so I can refer to it back to my paper. As I explained, I am doing my paper on sort of how the urban design really can impact like certain areas and like just sort of the whole process and how and if it's possible, could you please tell me your full name and your occupation as it relates to my topic?
Sure. So my name is Brian McBroom. I'll give you one of my business cards. And my title is Director of Community Development
Oh,
for the City of Greeley. I've worked for the city just since June, but I've worked for cities, particularly in community development, for my whole career.
wow. How far back does it span?
So I'm in my 36th year of working for
Wow.
cities. Last 15 here in Colorado, prior to that in the state of Michigan, where I'm originally
Wow.
from.
Oh, wow, really? Huh. I have a few friends from Michigan. It's interesting.
It's a very nice place. I still have a lot of family back there, but the winters here are much better.
Yeah, I bet. If you could predict it.
Oh,
Yeah. Well, so what got you into sort of working with cities and urban design to begin with?
that's a great question. I actually, when I was in college, I originally considered becoming an architect,
Oh, really?
and instead of becoming an architect, I ended up taking classes in college regarding urban planning.
Right.
And so I changed my focus to urban planning. And after I graduated, I used my education. I was lucky enough to get a job in urban planning,
Oh, wow.
working for a consultant who was doing urban planning work for a city. And that launched me on a career of working in what's generally called community development.
Oh, that's cool.
Cities not only do urban design work, but cities are typically a regulatory agency that review new private development within the city. And so a city like Greeley will have standards for urban design. And so I manage a department whose job it is to review proposals for new development and make sure it meets the city's requirements for design of private property. Things like parking lots, landscaping, building height, the style of buildings, all those things would be subject to the city's regulatory
Right.
role in managing new development.
Right. So, is there any sort of examples that you've of any projects you worked on here in Greeley so far?
Well, since I just started in June, nothing that I've worked on personally. But you see the new apartment building next door.
Right.
That
Yeah.
would have gone through a pretty extensive city review. So the city has just pages and pages of regulations that
Right.
not only apply to interior construction, like electrical and plumbing, but they also apply to the physical structure of the building. How tall can it be? How far back it needs to be set back from the street? How many parking spaces it needs to have? How much
Right.
landscaping it needs to have? And all those things ultimately have an effect on the quality of life in the city, which is why the city regulates those things.
Right. Yeah. So from your expertise, what if you were to explain to someone who knew nothing of urban design, how would you sort of explain like the significance it has in the city, sort of?
Well, the cities for a long time have understood the value of managing development on private property. Now, there's a balance there because owners of private property have rights to
Mm.
develop their land, use their land for some purpose.
I've
The
heard some of those
cities,
rules. Yeah.
the cities have an interest in regulating that development for the greater good of the community. And so cities like Greeley try to find that balance between respecting one's individual property rights, but also regulating land so that at the end of the day, um, it all works and maintains a certain quality of life in the city in ways that it can be a nice place to live and work for a long time.
Right.
Greeley's not unusual in that regard. Again, I've been doing this work my whole career, and every community I've worked for regulates land in a similar manner. specific standards may vary,
Hmm.
but it's all aimed at achieving a certain quality of life for people that live within the city.
Right, right,
And that's why we have the legal authority to do it. Because
right,
again, when we regulate private land, we're somewhat restricting their rights to develop the property how they see fit. So there has to be a clear community benefit to us doing it. So that's why cities do it.
right. So, sort of when the city works on new areas, so what sort of are the first sort of steps into determining what you could do with an area and what you can what the interests are?
So,
But
so cities like Greeley adopt a set of rules called a development code. It's probably 300 pages thick,
I read it in the
and it
municipal code. Yeah.
regulates development all across the city. And it generally divides the city into different zoning classifications,
Mm,
and the zoning that a property has then determines what development regulations apply.
right.
So, development regulations, zoning, first of all, zoning will divide the city such that you don't have intense industrial development next to residential development.
Right.
It'll provide some separation. And then within each of those zoning categories, we will regulate the intensity of development to make sure that it respects, again, the broader interests of the whole city. Not just allowing that property to be used to its fullest extent, but make sure it kind of fits in, respects adjoining properties. It's considerate of the impact development will have on traffic, on streets, how much water, sanitary sewer capacity it needs. All those things get taken into account when deciding what the regulations are. And then again, we review projects all the time
Mm,
to make sure it meets the city standards.
right. So, sorry. Uh, what does so when it comes to uh, choosing these regulations for a place and development for it, are there any other sort of like factors that could sort of play a part or influence them?
Lots of things factor in when
Right.
cities decide how much to regulate private property. Um, if if we're asked as staff to review, say, our regulations for industrial development in the city, one of the things we would do is take a look at how other cities regulate industrial development. The internet makes it easy for us to look at best practices nationwide for regulating industrial development. And industrial development in particular will have certain impacts to the community. So the regulations will be aimed at managing and mitigating those impacts. But we also want to be careful. I mentioned earlier, we want to balance our regulatory authority because there's also benefits to a city to having industrial development. Industrial
Right.
development can generate good tax revenue. Industrial development can provide good paying jobs for citizens. So the idea is to be generally permissive to allow it, but put conditions on it to make sure that that industrial development fits within the community. It doesn't create too much pollution, doesn't create too much traffic that can be mitigated.
Right.
So again, it's very much a balancing act. We're not trying to prevent it. We're trying to make sure that if that development occurs, that it's high quality and that it meets the community standards.
Right. Right. Okay. So, uh, um, sorry. So, and in the process, so with all these policies in place, do they ever sort of conflict with each other?
They do. They do. So we have, let's take a typical industrial building. Um, let's just use as an example the Prino factory
Mm-hmm.
to the north of us here a ways. Let's say, for example, they wanted to add on 50,000 square feet to make their plant bigger. The total review process would take probably 6 to 9 months, involves
Wow.
dozens of city staff. They're looking at all sorts of different things.
Right.
We would have staff looking at the height of the building, what it's made out of. We would have staff looking at, does it need more water or sewer capacity? Is it going to generate more traffic?
Right.
So we have to understand and maybe require the owner to make improvements to make sure the traffic can flow in and out. And there are times that some of those conflicts can conflict with each other.
Right.
So one of the things that city staff does, there might be dozens of us working on reviewing a set of plans, but we identify where there are conflicts, and then we work internally to resolve those,
Right.
so that we're not, say we review a project, we send a letter with a bunch of review comments on it. We want to make sure those comments don't conflict with each other.
Right.
So we will work internally to resolve those, so that the applicant or the property owner gets a set of review comments that they can address and correct, so that they can get their plans approved by the
Right.
city. But it's not unusual for that process to take months.
Right. So the process can be very difficult at some point.
It's very detailed. We might get a set of plans for a project that's 20 or 30 pages thick. All sorts of technical information on it.
Right.
And that can just relate to the site and the orientation of the building on the site. And then the building itself could have a set of plans that are 100 pages thick,
Right.
laying out the specific details of how the building itself would be constructed. A lot of technical, and then the property owner will have dozens of technical people preparing those plans. They submit it to us, we review, and we send comments back.
Right.
It's almost like submitting a paper to the teacher for review. The teacher's going to review it against his or her standards and send you comments back. It's the same with a big, thick set of plans. And
Right.
every project that gets built will require a fairly detailed set of plans like that, way before the city grants permission to start building.
Right. Right. So, have there ever been any sort of projects or ideas that have sort of been very difficult to resolve, or like almost unresolved in some cases?
Well, we have an interesting case going right now. On the west side of the city, there's an 8-acre property that's been vacant forever.
Oh.
It has a subdivision, single-family homes
I see.
wrapped around it. And the owner of the property wants to build townhouses on this property.
Right.
And the adjoining residents object to that. So they've submitted their plans. We've gone through a very detailed staff review, but at the end of that review, in that particular case, the city council has to make a final decision. The residents in the neighborhood will be attending a city council meeting, objecting to the plans and asking the city council to deny it. The property owner will be there asking the city council to approve it. And in most cases, if the residents have certain things that they're objecting to, city staff, we would work with the property owner to try to address those concerns, to try to address resident objections if we can, so that city council is in a position to approve it. This is an interesting one where staff and the developer have worked with the residents to try to address their reasons for objecting, but objections remain. So the city council is going to have a very difficult decision.
Right.
And if they approve it, the residents in the adjoining neighborhood could potentially sue the city.
Right.
If the city council denies it, the property owner could object and sue the city. So sometimes land use cases can get very contentious.
Right. Wow.
It doesn't happen very often, but I would say for a city like Greeley, there will be 1 or 2 projects a year that will be controversial. And we may have a public hearing, it's called, where residents are invited to come in and speak to the city council. We probably will have This public hearing is going to occur in early March. We probably will have 20, 30, 40 residents attend. It's the sort of thing you might see on the news when residents attend to a public hearing,
Right, on the Tribune, yeah.
a public meeting, and object. But ultimately, the city council makes that final decision.
Right. So, what are some of the reasons the residents would object? Is there sort of a interest or concern they have with the project?
Great question. I think they have two primary concerns. One is townhouses generally are closer together. So on that same 8 acre parcel, you can have a greater number of townhouses than you would if they built single family homes, where one home is on each home. So one of their objections is more houses means more traffic, and they're objecting to the additional traffic that it's going to generate. They also believe that attached townhouses are incompatible with their single family homes.
Right.
They think it's going to negatively affect the value of their existing homes.
Right, economic belief, right. There's also a reason they're concerned about traffic. I'm not sure if it's true, correct me if it's not, but in some cases I heard the more traffic could actually devalue, a certain area because...
Possible. Retail businesses, however, the more traffic, the better.
Right.
Because those are all potential customers.
Right.
Retail businesses that are on major roads with a lot of traffic, that property is generally more valuable.
Right.
Single family residential, street with a lot of traffic, generally less valuable than a home off the main road back in the interior of a neighborhood. So it depends on the land use.
Oh, wow. I didn't know about that. So, you mentioned that there were one or two controversial projects that occur, annually or, a little, less than that. But, is there a sort of common, controversies from these topics or being projects?
I'd say usually when residents object to a new development, it's because in their view it's negatively impacting their quality of life.
Right.
And that generally comes in the form of traffic impacts,
Right.
or this concern that the residents in this case are raising, that the new use proposed is incompatible. It's inconsistent with the nature of their neighborhood, and so they believe the new development will reduce their quality of life. Usually it's traffic. Sometimes they'll raise concerns about crime. If it's, for example, if a bar serving alcohol were located right next to a single-family neighborhood, residents might be concerned about crime.
Right.
People hanging out doing things they shouldn't be doing late at night. But usually it's traffic is probably the big one.
Right.
And the other would be this incompatibility of land uses. Somehow it's going to change the character of the neighborhood in ways that aren't positive.
Right.
But we actually have fairly sophisticated ways of measuring traffic impacts and how to mitigate those. Other quality of life impacts like crime or property values are harder to measure.
Right.
And so it's harder to mitigate those impacts. First of all, it's hard to prove that those are real impacts. And if so, how do you mitigate them?
Right. So, is there a reason why, I remember previously you mentioned that if the project is dismissed, closed, the owner of the property might sue for, not being able to build the housing. Is there a reason why the property owner wants to build in that area specifically?
Well, from what they've told us, they own the property for a long time. In their opinion, they can't build single-family homes on that 8 acres and make money. They can't do it in such a way that they wouldn't lose money. So their argument is, it's our property. We're entitled to develop it for some purpose. and the uses that the residents prefer just aren't economically feasible. And so the owner is sticking with his desired plan, and he's going to make an argument that it should be approved over the objections of the adjoining residents.
Right.
So those are very difficult cases for the city council.
Right. So, is land use a really big sort of controversial topic that occurs?
Again, we only have a few a year that are controversial. Um, they certainly can be very controversial. Um, Residents will buy a home in a neighborhood, and so changes in and around the neighborhood that they believe negatively affect them, that gets people upset. Because in most cases, when you buy a home, it's the single biggest investment you'll ever make. And so residents get very protective of those investments.
Especially here in North Colorado. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of policies put in place that sort of protect these residents in their rights?
That's a good question. In this particular case, the project is what I would call an infill development. It's an 8-acre piece with development all the way around it. Homes were built 20, 25 years ago.
Right.
If that same 8 acres were being developed way out west on 34, without any neighbors around it, it wouldn't be controversial at all.
Right.
It's the fact that it's occurring adjacent to an existing neighborhood that tends to make projects controversial, because it's disturbing whatever equilibrium is in that part of the community now. You have this new development that's kind of a shock to the system. It's impacting traffic, and it's impacting noise maybe. It's putting more kids into the school system, and if the schools are crowded already, that would be an issue.
Right.
It's these infill projects that, over the course of my career, tend to be the most controversial.
Right. Interesting.
The other alternative is, even if it's in the middle of nowhere, if it's a project that has lots of impacts, maybe it's a factory with odors, or it's going to be loud, or have trucks going all hours of the day and night, those can still become controversial if their impacts are so significant that they're impacting properties further away.
Right. Has that ever been seen in Greeley before? Sort of that case?
I'm not aware of anything like that here, but other places I've worked, I remember years ago, there was a proposal to build an incinerator. It was going to take waste and burn it.
Right.
It was going to have impacts over quite a large area.
On the health,
So
right.
in some cases, residents from many miles away attended a public meeting to object. Those are very rare projects that have such a regional impact that they draw people from all around. Usually it tends to be, the controversial cases I've been involved with tend to be controversial because of the neighbors directly adjacent.
Right. That's interesting. So that's sort of why zoning's put in place to sort of regulate that.
Right.
Right.
Try to keep objectionable land uses further removed from, say, residential.
Right.
Generally, in residential areas of the community, you want to have the non-residential zoning you would have around a neighborhood would be the sorts of uses that everybody wants near them. A gas station, or restaurants, or a grocery store. But more intense land uses like a factory, you tend to want to put further away, isolate them so you can manage the negative impacts.
Right. That's interesting.
And every community will do that. Have you ever heard of the game Sin City?
So roughly.
It's actually an old game, but it kind of delves into those issues. You get to plan the city however you want. If you have lots of industrial in your city, you'll generate lots of revenue and lots of good paying jobs, but lots of impacts that make it not a very nice place to live. So you're always trying to balance all of these things to make a well-rounded community that has a high quality of life.
Right.
If it's just residential, People have to drive somewhere to shop. They have to drive somewhere else to go to work. They have to drive somewhere else to take their kids to school. So you want a mixture of land uses, but you want to orient them in such a way that they can all coexist.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
So would you say like really has so far done a good job trying to improve or create good zoning?
I think so. I think so. There's an area out on the very, very west side of the city that we're taking a much closer look at right now. There's very little development out there, but we're starting to get a lot of pressure for a lot of development. So it's
Right.
causing us to take a closer look at what land uses we want in that part of the city and then how to orient them in the best possible way so that it can be a nice community, a sustainable community long term.
Right. So there's sort of urge to sort of develop there. Is it there a reason why on the west side specifically? I mean, I read somewhat newspapers a little bit, so I know it's pretty hefty, for the acres over there.
Well, I think two main reasons. One, lots of available land,
Right.
um, and compared to communities further west like Loveland and Fort Collins, development in Greeley is less expensive,
Right.
and there seems to be the strongest market in residential these days is for more affordable homes,
Right.
and so we're seeing a lot of pressure for more affordable homes on the west side of the city because it's quite a bit cheaper than those homes can be built on the other side of I-25 in Loveland and Fort Collins, Longmont.
Right. So that's sort of the interconnecting area. Right. So, alright. Oh, sorry. What was I gonna ask?
You're asking great questions.
So the West End is like right now sort of the place to go for value investment. Is there a history on as to like why there's not so much value in it any other areas? Perhaps.
Well, I mentioned infill development. In many cases, infill development is more complicated. Uh, Developing in in areas of the city that are more vacant can be easier.
Mm,
Um, Take, for example, the apartment building next door to where we are today.
mm,
Um, there's existing streets, there's water and sewer lines in the street. So some of those things were good. Having those things available nearby is good. But they had to take down existing structures. They
right.
had to remove all that out of the way. They had to fit that apartment building into this area of the community that has lots of existing development around it.
Right.
So it's just it tends to be more complicated, which can usually means more expensive.
Right. How much did it cost to sort of redevelop this area?
I don't know for sure, just because I wasn't here at that time,
Right.
but it's not unusual. The city has been encouraging redevelopment along 8th Avenue.
Right.
So
The art
because
projects
it's more complicated and because it's more expensive, it's not unusual for the city to be a partner to help financially make
Right.
that project work, because we have an interest in seeing new housing to help support the retail and restaurants along 8th Avenue. Out west, it's a little bit more market driven.
Right.
It's vast chunks of open land,
More freedom.
and so developers kind of get to do more of what the market says the market wants out west. Where here, it's the city and property owners and developers working together to achieve some other outcomes.
Right. So there's this fine balance between
Yeah.
investors and the city and people they work with.
Yeah, we particularly on this side of the city, it's not uncommon for us to have a partnership relationship with a developer to help cause projects to happen. Out west, where it's more wide open, we're mostly just a regulatory agency. They submit something, we review it,
Right.
and get it in a condition where the city can approve it. But it would be very unusual in an open area out west for us to participate as a partner. It just isn't necessary. And so we
Right.
focus our energies in parts of the city where we want to see development, but that it's more complicated and more expensive.
Right. Right. That's Interesting.
Yeah, and Greeley is so diverse from east to west.
Mm,
There's there might be the city has different goals for different parts of the
areas.
city.
Right. Yes, I remember reading about a plan a few years ago they had in place to help the East Memorial neighborhood, I believe.
Oh,
So
I've not even heard about that.
apparently, they wanted the city wanted to sort of help rejuvenate sort of value in the area on the other side of the highway. So what sort of like I guess what I want to ask is um, uh, what when cities wants to help improve a certain area, what are the sort of I guess factors that sort of show that the area is not as I guess pristine as others.
Well, indicators would be more vacant buildings,
Right.
which means other problems can mean problems with vagrancy,
Right.
people breaking into vacant buildings, higher crime rates,
Mm.
just visually less
Healing.
attractive. Um, there's an old Salvation Army store
Right. That yeah.
just down
I
the
used to
street
go
here,
there as a kid.
and I had lunch with a representative of the company that owns that, and they bought it so they can redevelop it.
Oh really?
But they need some help from us.
Right.
It's expensive to tear down that old building. There's lots of rules and regulations on how to dispose of old construction materials. That drives the cost up. The building sitting there has not only no value, but it's going to cost all this money to scrape it and create a fresh, blank
Right.
piece of land to build something.
Right. Also, it's on 8th Avenue, so it'd be kind of hard to do it.
Yeah. So for that block to get redeveloped, they're probably going to need our help. One of the ways we help, though, is by looking at our development regulations. For example, we're looking at changing our development regulations so that on that site, they would not have to provide any landscaping and they would not have to provide any parking. Most businesses, they're required to build parking on site for cars. But in this downtown area, we're willing to forego requiring off-street parking
Because of the walkability.
because it's walkable. We have lots of on-street parking, and that allows the building to get a little bit bigger and helps with the economics of that project.
Right. So sometimes you are able to sort of shift the development code a bit for some
Yeah.
certain projects.
Yeah, it's exactly what we're doing along this 8th Avenue corridor.
Right.
So development looks different on 8th Avenue than it would out at 71st and 10th Street. 71st and 10th Street, or 83rd and 10th Street, we're going to see a Starbucks out there. That's going to look like a more traditional Starbucks as we set back off the street, we'll have parking on site. The Dutch Brothers, right over here, if it had developed a year from now, we're going through the process of changing our regulations. What might be the case a year from now is that Dutch Brothers can be right up on the sidewalk
Oh
and
wow.
not have to provide parking. Now they need some pavement because they have the drive-through lane. But the idea is by reducing those standards, you encourage redevelopment.
Right. So all of 8th Avenue is currently sort of going through the process of being redeveloped.
In long term, we'd like to create a stronger connection between the downtown, which is further north, and the UNC campus. Try to
Right.
see those two grow towards each other.
Right.
And that'll mostly be 8th Avenue, seeing more intense development along 8th Avenue to create a more of a Main Street effect that would connect the university to the other downtown plazas.
Right. So in your field is sort of the idea of like interconnectivity between different like areas in the city sort of a like top goal.
Very important. Because we want it to all work together as one city, even though the city has different characters in different areas. And you see here the university developed without a strong connection to downtown. So that's an opportunity for us. How can we work with the university and private developers to encourage development so the downtown can grow towards the university?
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Is there sort of a idea of like the second step that's going to happen after the two sort of, I guess, merge together?
Well, the idea is to create something that's viable long term, that's livable, that has a mix of residential and businesses that support walkability, um, that's attractive.
Right,
Um, but underlying all that, it has to be economically feasible. We have to
right,
create an environment where businesses can locate here and be successful.
right,
If the city has to help be a catalyst to cause it to happen initially, that's good. But if we have to continue to support businesses, that gets hard for a city to do.
right.
Cities, a lot of times, will do that for a short term,
Get them going.
provide incentives to a business to get it going. Then the idea is to have an environment where those businesses can be successful without support from the city. There's enough shoppers, customers in the area so that they can be successful providing services that the residents in the area want.
Right. Would you say that's like sort of a big issue downtown? Sort of.
It's
the
very
whole,
challenging.
Yeah.
It's very challenging. Retail businesses in the downtown struggle. Restaurants, bars, and restaurants do better. But you need a little bit of everything to make it all work together.
Right. Yeah. 'Cause I will say I live downtown. I live right by Lincoln Library, so
Oh, nice.
I will say it does look way better than I remember being. Lincoln Park looks way better than it does like last year. But no, I will say it is interesting, particularly looking at the sort of businesses because I remember seeing so many businesses. I've seen as a kid shut down, like Florino's, the shoe store. So would you say? Uh, downtown, I suppose, it is downtown. It is sort of the center of the city. Would you say really sort of has a problem centering around, like, I guess having like a center, like an issue with,
I think so. As we talk about development out west,
right,
one of our concerns is new homes built out west are probably too far away for those people to come downtown for their regular shopping.
right,
So, what mix of businesses do we need in the downtown to draw those people in? Because businesses downtown need those residents to come down here to spend money.
right, yeah,
So, it's probably not retail. Retail meaning a shoe store or a card shop.
right,
It's too easy to buy those things online from Amazon or go to a big box store.
right.
Um,
So like amenities need to be needed, sort of like,
that's probably more likely, but at the same time, the city helped the Maddie Apartments, which is the building next door. The city helped that project because they're a little higher end, so the people that live in them are expected to have more money to
right,
spend in the downtown. So
right,
you want a mix of housing types, but having higher end housing helps drive business.
right,
Because those people will spend their money here.
right,
Drawing them in from West Greeley is going to be more difficult, but we're still trying to figure out how do we do that.
right,
So we've talked a lot about UCCC. How do we create cultural
right,
amenities in this part of the city that will draw people in on a regular basis?
right, bringing sort of the heritage. And
Yeah.
bringing- Right. I find that such an interesting topic because,
It's an interconnected network that can be a real puzzle to figure out.
right. So would you say Greeley sort of has a struggle with sort of keeping its cultural sort of heritage along with, the vitality of, the market today?
Well, I would say it's something that we believe can really be a key in the downtown to
Right.
drawing people in, because those amenities aren't available elsewhere.
Right,
So how do we take advantage of downtown Greeley's unique nature, build on that,
right,
so that it's a destination for people to come and enjoy themselves and spend money,
right,
add to their quality of life, that they will choose to live in Greeley because they like what the downtown has to offer. cities that don't have downtowns desperately want one,
Right.
because it helps establish a certain character for a
Right.
community. But those that have a downtown, like Greeley, we struggle to keep them viable.
Right.
Again, it used to be the center of retail commerce for cities, but because of the changing ways that we spend our money on retail goods, what's called hard goods retail,
Right.
brick and mortar stores where you go in to buy something, are steadily declining because we buy our things other ways now.
Right.
Restaurants, other types of entertainment, you can't get that from Amazon. You still have to physically, and people want those amenities.
Right.
But a downtown can only support so many bars and restaurants and other things. So the idea of having more residents with higher disposable incomes helps, we hope, helps diversify the businesses in downtown.
Right. So would you say that's been successful so far?
It's very much a work in progress. It's kind of a battle to keep the downtown viable. We are constantly thinking of ways to invest in the downtown, not only in the physical infrastructure. This year we're going to be redoing some of the plazas
Oh, really?
to make them more attractive. So that's something the city can do. But we're also trying to think of how to cause redevelopment to occur, bring in more higher-end residential. We'd love to see a higher-end hotel in the downtown.
Right.
The Doubletree's doing well. We'd like to see an even higher-end boutique hotel. There's the Quality Inn that's, it's seen better days. We would like to somehow encourage redevelopment of that site to something that's more attractive and we think more in keeping with a downtown that people would want to spend time in.
Yeah, it is a beautiful hotel. I went inside a few times. It's very beautiful interior.
Historical hotel that has this facade on it. So that's a question. If we're going to encourage redevelopment, do you redevelop the existing building or do you knock it down and start over?
Oh, really?
There's no right or wrong. It's partnering with somebody who wants to do something with that site and figuring out how we can help, but make sure that redevelopment is consistent with the city's vision. Like if somebody wanted to put a meatpacking plant on that site, we would say, sorry, wrong place for that.
Right.
We would want something that really helps complement the downtown.
Right. So sort of keep like thematically sort of.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting.
And that all plays into urban design. And the city we don't do that by ourselves. We would commission a study, for example,
Right.
to try to figure out what should happen in certain parts of the city so that it can all be kind of well thought out.
Oh yeah, I read some of the commissions. Other things, so they're all right there. So yeah, it's very
It's very involved.
very meticulous. Yes.
And the community plays a big part of that. It's not just having technical experts tell us whether it work. It's engaging the community in meaningful ways to do something that the community can support.
Right.
Because it's there's some science, but it's a lot about what works here. What does our community think makes the most sense?
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah,
So-
it's very interesting stuff.
Right. So, how has the community so far responded to sort of the ideas, coming downtown?
Well, a big way that we communicate with the community in the downtown is there are two business groups. So two groups that represent owners of businesses or owners of property
Right. Representatives.
that we talk to all the time. So it's not the city deciding on our own what makes sense. It's lots of sharing ideas, looking for what's worked elsewhere, what's the city willing to do to cause things to happen, and then talking to these groups of business owners, who many times are residents too,
Right.
to look for areas of common interest and partnership.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's an awful lot to it.
Oh yeah, no, it seems very difficult because definitely considering the different economic classes. Because
Mhm.
you mentioned earlier, they're trying to thinking about redeveloping the Plaza Hotel, and I think it's actually a very great idea because it's a beautiful hotel, very beautiful area right across the museum, right across lots
Yeah.
of areas. I do find it interesting though because I've been inside a few times and I've noticed. Quite a few of the residents do happen to be sort of struggling families.
Yeah.
So, how would the city tackle something like that?
Well, we have a very aggressive affordable housing program anyway. Um, so we are very aggressively trying to add affordable housing all across the city.
Right,
So, great point. For some, that's the best they can do. So, how do we create alternatives for them that help them perhaps advance their quality of life and get their lives and their families' lives moving in a positive direction? Because a
right.
lot of times people live in temporary housing like that because it's all they can get, but it's not cheap.
Oh no, it's
Paying
not.
weekly or
300
bi-weekly,
sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah, on
So,
West 10th it's 300 for small motels over there.
and the reason they do it is they can't get approved for a lease to rent
Right.
cheaper space. Or they
Yeah.
don't have income requirements, or they have other problems in their past.
Yeah, they don't qualify
Um,
for housing sometimes. Yeah.
and
Oh,
so we have a very aggressive affordable housing program that's aimed at giving people a hand up.
right. Right. Oh, that's interesting. So you mentioned that they're adding more housing around for like I guess lower income residents.
Yeah, really across the whole spectrum. We did a what's called a housing needs assessment back in the summer. It said over the next 20 years, we need 20,000 housing units
Wow.
across the spectrum. Affordable, probably we need a greater majority of those at the affordable end of the spectrum, but we also, based upon that study, need more high end executive housing too, because it helps us accomplish some other goals long term. But a study like that helps focus our efforts,
Right.
helps us then develop a strategy or maybe a bunch of strategies to meet the needs laid out in that housing assessment.
Right. What would cause such a short of housing not being built?
Um, Two things. The housing market cooled off because of COVID, because of the cost of materials, the cost of labor,
Right.
interest rates. But there's also still a lot of people moving into this area.
Right.
So it's a combination of both.
So has there been sort of an influx in recent years, decades?
What we're seeing is 2, 3 years ago, Greeley was quite a bit less expensive than
Yeah.
Denver. But because so many people have moved up this way, Greeley's kind of caught up.
Right.
And now we're seeing the same affordability problems the Denver metro area is seeing. So those that left Denver in search of cheaper housing up this way, so many have moved up this way that the market uh, has equalized. And
Right.
so
Ricochet.
it's still a little bit cheaper here on average than I would say in Denver,
Oh
but
yeah.
there's not much of a gap anymore.
Right. So, affordability is like a really big factor overall.
Big issue. Plus, we have a homeless problem
Right.
in
Yeah.
downtown Greeley, and so we have a growing program to help get homeless people into housing.
Right. Yeah.
It's actually a nationally recognized program that we've adopted called Housing First. Get them in suitable housing, then start to work on the problems that cause them to be homeless.
Right.
There's other approaches where, in order to have housing, you have to immediately start working on the problems of aging homeless. Usually it's substance abuse.
Right.
But Housing First says get them off the street, then start to work on the problems that cause them to be homeless.
Right. So, would you say so far Greeley's done a good, city's done a good job so far tackling it?
I think And again, I've just been here since June. The city has dedicated significant resources to it,
I'd say
but it takes a while to see the benefits.
right, yeah. It's yeah, no, I definitely seen the improvement. I remember,
Good.
Lincoln Park used to be, littered with needles and other paraphernalia, but it's really empty now. It's
Good.
honestly very uncanny
And
almost.
that's not because they've been chased out, it's because the city's offering services
Right. So,
to help them improve their situation.
right. So Greeley's history of homelessness, it's been, so would you say it's been a very severe issue that's, been.
I would say it's the same challenges that every urbanized area is facing, particularly across the Front Range.
Oh yeah, I heard with Denver
Um,
and everything.
I don't think what we're experiencing here is unusual, but for us, serious problems that didn't exist 20 years ago.
Right. Oh, what would have caused such a rise
Well,
in homelessness?
it's a growing issue nationwide. In my personal opinion, um, the United States for decades has not invested very well in uh, mental health care,
Right.
and
Yeah.
we're seeing the results of that.
Right. Yeah. No. I've noticed Northern Colorado. I've read some of the reports conducted by UC Health. And, apparently, it's the biggest shortage and the biggest complaint so far was mental health.
Yeah,
Wow.
it seems to me, and I'm no expert, but people who are homeless that are struggling from substance abuse, there are underlying factors that
Conditions.
cause them
Oh, definitely.
to be addicted to illegal substances.
Right.
And so it's not just preventing them from using, it's solving the underlying problem. So it's a significant investment that could take years to produce results, which is why, in my opinion, the state and federal government don't invest more. The return on that investment is too far out.
Right.
So they spend money on more immediate needs.
Right. So wow, that's interesting. Wow.
But I'm not a mental health or health wellness expert, but in my years in local government, we've underspent on mental health
Oh
services,
yeah.
and we're seeing the negative impacts of that.
Oh, definitely. Some of the people I interact with, homeless people, it's almost, it really is tragic,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, these aren't new problems for them. They've struggled their whole lives, probably.
Right.
And I think allowing them to be homeless is a compassionate approach, but at the same time, there's a limit to how many homeless society can manage and still have a reasonable quality of life
Right.
for residents who aren't homeless. So it really
Right.
has, again, I think, an aggressive program to help people who are homeless. We have caseworkers who work with people on an individual basis to get them on a path to improving their situation.
Right.
That's not typical for a city like Greeley. Typically, health services like that are provided by county government, but Greeley City Council saw the need. Weld County wasn't making an investment to improve that situation, and so the Greeley City Council said they would.
Right. Huh. That's
But it takes a lot of courage for them to do that because it takes taxpayer dollars to create those programs.
right. So has there been sort of a some taxpayers? Has there been sort of a compliance, or has there been sort of a resistance to this?
Well, I think there's general support for the concepts. The question is, what do we need to invest, and how can we measure the results that we're getting? Nobody wants to invest money and not know that we're making things better.
Right.
So the key is to make the investment, but then lay out how we get a return on that investment over time. Maybe it's by having fewer homeless, by having lower crime in the downtown, by encouraging more economic development in the downtown because we have fewer homeless. It's
Right.
looking at that, I think, holistically.
Right. Okay. Okay. So.
But if you have an interest in going into the social sciences in some way, there is such a desperate need for, I would say, social workers and people that work in social services in every city, every state.
Right. Yeah, I've pretty quickly noticed, like, people in Colorado told me, therapists here are pretty, hard to catch. Yeah.
There just isn't nearly enough people willing to do that work because it's very difficult work, and traditionally it hasn't paid very well.
Right.
So that's part of the investment. We need to place a value on those services by paying those people more, so that smart people who choose that as a career path.
Right. Right. So, that's interesting. So overall, to conclude the interview, would you say that so far with the problems Greeley has had in its past, would you say that the municipality is addressing them pretty?
I think the city is honest with where it is,
Right.
and the city council just had a strategic planning retreat a couple of weeks ago, so we're going to learn. They do that every year, and that's a chance for them to decide what's the most important of the most important, so they can give us as their staff good direction. So we'll be learning more about that over the next few weeks. But it's the things that we've talked about, I believe, will be towards the top of their list.
Right.
Managing the future of Greeley, new growth out west, and redevelopment in the downtown area.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
I really
I
appreciate
enjoyed
this.
talking with you.
Oh, I enjoyed talking to you too. This was very